You're watching India Today Global. Today is the 25th anniversary of the Kargil War. 25 years ago, our brave hearts fought valiantly against the Pakistani soldiers as also mujahideens or terrorists. And today, we're celebrating the victory 25 years hence. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Kargil. He inaugurated the Sinkhungla tunnel, as also spoke with the family members of fallen soldiers and those who were wounded. There are many war veterans who are right now in Kargil and have been talking to our network on what really transpired in those months, the summer of 1999. Over here, we will look at one particular angle, that is how Pakistan betrayed India, how Pakistan continues to be a niggling problem when it comes to the border areas between India and Pakistan. I'm being joined by Raj Chengappa, Group Editor, Publishing, India Today Group. Thank you so much, Raj, for joining us. But before I come to you, let's just go across and listen to what Prime Minister Modi had to say about Pakistan. Well, we're just playing that bite out for you.
I can look at.
कुछ ही दिन बाद इस 5 अगस्त को आर्टिकल 370 का अंत हुए 5 वर्ष पूरे होने जा रहा है। जम्मू कश्मीर आज नए भविष्य की बात कर रहा है, बड़े सपनों की बात कर रहा है। जम्मू कश्मीर की पहचान G20 जैसी ग्लोबल समिट की अहम बैठक करने के लिए हो रही है। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर डेवलपमेंट के साथ साथ जम्मू कश्मीर लेह लद्दाख में टूरिज्म सेक्टर भी तेजी से ग्रो कर रहा है। दशकों बाद कश्मीर में सिनेमा घर खुला है। 3.5 दशक के बाद पहली बार श्रीनगर में ताजिया निकला है। धरती का हमारा स्वर्ग तेजी से शांति और सौहार्द की दिशा में आगे बढ़ रहा है।
It's been 25 years, and yet every government continues to talk about what Pakistan did then and what Pakistan continues to do today. Raj, if I could come to you. This is one of the biggest conflicts that we've seen between India and Pakistan, one of them, not the wars, but one of the biggest conflicts in terms of what Pakistan did, the modus operandi. Raj Chengappa himself was covering the war back then, so if you could reminisce and tell us how were things back then, and has anything changed when it comes to Pakistan's policies towards India?
Well, I think both sides learned a lot of lessons. I think the Prime Minister said that Pakistan should have learned its lessons. Whether it has doesn't seem so, because we still seem to have tensions currently. The spate of attacks in Jammu, they've shifted the entire theatre from Srinagar and the valley to Jammu, because that's very vulnerable to us. And the idea is an upcoming election to disrupt that, and of course to cause turmoil, because they continue to push for Kashmir despite the abrogation of Article 370, and it's still their prime policy, as it was in 1999.
Absolutely.
So we are seeing different tactical approaches. In Kargil, it was a massive, really massive tactical approach that took us by surprise. And I remember that I was with Prime Minister Vajpayee. At that time, he was the Prime Minister, and we were in Pondicherry and heading to see a space launch, when one of the reporters said, "Stay back, there's going to be something." I didn't know, because normally Mr. Vajpayee never used to speak much. And that is when he announced that India would start attacking, Air Force jets would start attacking Pakistan points, but not cross the LOC. Mr. Vajpayee was very clear that the war will be confined within our territory. And when I spoke to General V.P. Malik at that time, he said it's like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Because what Pakistan had done is that if you see the terrain over there, magnificent peaks, and they're really beautiful Himalayan peaks, but they overlook a very strategic highway.
That's
and
true.
Pakistan occupied the heights very surreptitiously. They came, they occupied it. They pretended that they were Mujahideens and others, but they're really regular Pakistan army troops that were there, and then caught India by surprise. So one of the lessons, I mean, apart the fact that Pakistan has to learn a lot of lessons in the way we've done things, is in the way not to be adventurous or foolish, I would say, in the way they went about it, is that we also need to worry about intelligence. Intelligence failure was one of the biggest things that came out of Kargil and the Kargil Review Committee. And the fact that we were ill-equipped to handle this kind of intrusion. It took us a long time to gather our troops. There was a great shortage of high mountain equipment and clothes and everything else, and our troops really, I mean, very brave. And 25 years later, we must sort of, commend them.
Well, there's
and,
so much you just said, a lot to pick points on in terms of intelligence failure, in terms of the Pakistani betrayal, so to say, whether India had the wherewithal at the time or not. But let's begin with how it started. Now, we do know that the bus diplomacy had begun, and we were looking at maybe a new chapter. What changed? Because this is the story of Pakistan, Raj. The establishment thinks a certain way. Civilian dispensation, especially under Nawaz Sharif, Mian Nawaz, thought a different way. He's always been or tried being bold, but it never works out in Pakistan to be looking at India and looking at peace. So nothing has changed, but what really happened then?
Well, it's strange that Mian Nawaz Sharif Saab is back in power in some ways. And I do recall that he always did seem to have, wanting to have good relations with India. And the fact that the Lahore bus trip happened, that Mr. Vajpayee went across at that time, is historic. I mean, people, when you look back at that time, we did have Mr. Modi do that for Mia Saab's wedding when he took over the first time as Prime Minister. And then again, there was problems, right? So there has been, if you see, unfortunately, history has a terrible habit of repeating itself.
Now, India, Pakistan, surely so.
So what happens is that, in fact, I covered the Lahore trip and we praised it a lot, and we thought that things were improving because both sides, mind you, had exploded had done their nuclear tests. And the feeling among strategists is that two nuclear powers would not go to war.
That's true.
And therefore, there was a lull in India, thinking that, well, the balance has been reached. We conducted tests in 1998, 5 of them. They, as a kind of one-upmanship, did 6. And so the balance, the strategic balance was thought to be achieved. No one thought that these two nuclear powers, and so Pakistan, as it does now, was always testing the threshold of India's tolerance. And at that time, what they did was they, secretly, I mean, tactically, it was a brilliant move by President Musharraf, who was then the army chief, to move on to the heights and catch India by surprise. Now, especially after the fact that both Mr. Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif, the Prime Minister then, had shaken hands and had promised to further relations. So we were virtually caught napping because the, by May they were on our throats. But in February and January, we were bonhomie, in good terms with them. So I think that's one of the things is that what you talked about is a very important point. The division between the establishment, which is the army, and the civilian government or the political government. And interestingly, you can ask me other questions, but just a little fact that I asked, I'd gone to Jeddah where Nawaz Sharif was in exile.
Yes,
and
you did.
Yeah, and I interviewed him, and it was the first, so it was the first time I think he was speaking to an Indian journalist or any journalist of the subcontinent. And interestingly, I asked him this question, and I said, look, Mian Saab, India trusted you, and why did you do what you did? So he says, Vajpayee Saab is right to feel that I betrayed him, but what he didn't know was that my own general was betraying me. And he claims, Nawaz Sharif claimed to me, that he was not aware of the plans that General Musharraf had to take the heights.
Right.
So immediately after I did that, I was called by, after we published the article, I was called to Pakistan again. And that time I spoke to the then Prime Minister, who was an interim Prime Minister, Chaudhry Saab, and also met General Musharraf. And there they claimed that Mian Saab was actually briefed, and Nawaz Sharif Saab was briefed. So the
Briefed
truth,
before?
yes, Chaudhry Saab said that that Mian Saab, Nawaz Sharif had held a cabinet meeting where they actually did namaz to say they were briefed about the intrusions that were going to happen. So we don't know where the truth lies, okay? But the fact is that how much of the civilian army coordination happens, whether they're on the same page, they're on different pages, the military plays a major role in this particular thing, and we need to be aware even at this stage where General Asim Munir is in charge. We are seeing what's happening in Jammu. There seems to be all these kind of let's say, peace talks that Pakistan wants us, let's get together, let's move forward. But
that's a very interesting point you make, Raj. I'll tell you why. Because back then, Nawaz Sharif, whether he knew he didn't, there was certainly a point in time where the establishment had told him, not that he was a part of the decision making, had told him that this is what is going to happen, and maybe he played along, he went along with it. And today, when there is a divide in the Pakistani establishment and Nawaz Sharif returns, he again has come out and expressed remorse over what happened in Kargil. There was a recent interaction as soon as he returned to Pakistan after the win, so on and so forth. He actually spoke about Kargil and he said it shouldn't have happened. The camp in Pakistan, the establishment has changed. The army no longer is a follower of Musharraf. In fact, he lived in exile. So now he can say this. But then what is to say that tomorrow when, or even today when Kashmir and Jammu is being attacked, that this government will not say anything because they've learned from the lessons in the past, that you cannot question the army. You will only question the army in hindsight when there is another group sitting in Rawalpindi.
I really, the truth about what happened between the two, I don't know, right? Our job is to report what they said. You get a sense when I met Mian Saab, Nawaz Sharif Saab, that he seemed to believe what he said. And if he's saying it 25 years later, it comes back, there must be truth in it. When I talk to General Musharraf, he has his own side of view. So the truth is always a perception, as we can see in this matter. But coming to the point, I think we need to understand that the current Pakistan dispensation, as you know, and you are also an expert on the subject, is not a strong government.
Absolutely not.
You can see the chaos that is happening politically. You can see Imran Khan staging, and the court seem to be now supporting him. And the army must be truly worried because this is not a kind of a dispensation they would like. They thought they had everything under control. They had Imran Khan in prison. They had virtually
because they orchestrated that win for PMLN.
Absolutely.
They
and of course,
look at Imran Khan's popularity, even today.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. The fact is that, when he ran the government, it wasn't very clear that he would get the kind of majority. But by hoofing him out, he seemed to have become a hero again.
They ensured it.
So, I mean, that's internal Pakistan politics. But I think for us, it's very important that political stability be maintained over there, that there is a modicum of civilian government that is strong, that I think Pakistan, for whatever is said and done, I mean, it's one that we don't have great relations with each other and we are hostile. But Pakistan as a country deserves better. I think that
people deserve better.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that just as we, Indians are very hard focused on growth, on development, on our, moving our children forward, ourselves forward, putting ourselves in, trying to do better and higher in our individual fields. All the Pakistanis that I meet, civilians that I meet, have that same aspiration, the young or the old. And it's very important that they focus on development rather than continue with the old issues. I think they have to move on on a lot of these things. They may have issues with Kashmir that needs to be sorted out in a far more, reasonable manner, not in the way that they're doing. It cannot be with the gun pointed to your head and these continuous attacks.
True.
So, I mean, both are taking maximalist positions. If you're going to push the envelope, now, from what we can see, I was speaking to General Huda, who had done the Uri strikes in 2016, and he feels that the series of attacks has actually reached the threshold in terms of the Indian response. How we respond is there. So you're seeing history replaying itself, even as we celebrate the brave hearts.
You make a very
in this
important
thing.
point, because you're talking about strikes. The strategy from then to now has indeed changed on that front. Like you very interestingly had put what Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the then Prime Minister, had instructed, that nobody is going to enter Pakistani territory.
Cross
What
the
is
line.
officially
Across the LOC, yes.
the LOC. And today we're looking at surgical strikes. In hindsight, do you think that India should have breached that LOC and gone ahead? Maybe it would not have been a prolonged war of 3 months and would have been cut short? Or was that diplomatically the right decision because India stood on the right side of history rather than doing what the current administration has done? Maybe rightly so today, but would it have worked back then when Clinton was intervening, when the international community was watching? And maybe that's the reason why Clinton went ahead and supported India. Maybe the US wouldn't have supported India otherwise.
Yeah, I think the situations are vastly different. When you talk of Kargil, there was a major intrusion. They were occupying the heights, right? The others, that when you look at Uri, there were terror attacks. When you look at Pulwama, it was a terror attack. And therefore, we then struck back using the same instruments that they were trying to use on us, which was covert when we did the surgical strikes and when we used our jets to bomb Balakot soon after that. First time we were doing it since the 71 war to cross Pakistan territory, not just what we call our territory, but just Pakistan occupied Kashmir. There, this was a very, very wise decision. I know General Malik, who was the army chief at that time, and he was telling me that it was a really difficult war to fight. But if we had crossed see, after all, what is the reason General Malik was doing it? It was not because he just wanted to, give them a bloody nose or something. But the idea was that if they had taken a certain amount of territory, we could go and take territory that side inside Pakistan and therefore push them back from them rather than lose so many lives. But the cost of that was that you could have a full-scale war. And then that complicates, as you rightly said, the international opinion would turn against us. As long as Pakistan was seen as the aggressor, that it had caught India by surprise, and there was very, very valid, things that India had done, shaking hands with Nawaz Sharif, and here was Pakistan biting the very hand that he shook. So therefore, in some senses, it was a wise decision. It might have cost a lot of lives to us initially, but it gave us greater resilience, it gave us the moral right, and subsequently, if you see, when President Clinton intervened, it was Pakistan that had to withdraw its troops. Nawaz Sharif had gone there, and he was told that unless you pull back, Mr. Vajpayee was very clear, you need to get back to where you were, status quo, otherwise we will continue the conflict that goes on.
Right. Raj, look at the visuals. We are showing you Bofors. An interesting controversial issue here in India was completely mired in the scams, kickbacks, but it is one of the weapons that really won us Kargil.
I must tell you a little story, Geeta,
Please go
about
ahead.
this Bofors gun. I'd gone to cover the war, and there was this brigadier who was in charge of the artillery, and I said, how can a Bofors gun really make a difference? Because this is a war of the heights, right? The artillery guns are meant to go and strike, enemy targets the other side of it and all. So he said, okay, we'll tell you how we do it. And then he told one of the gunners who was there, and he asked me, the entire place was surrounded with peaks. And he said, point to a peak and point to a spot in that.
Whoa.
And he told the gunner then, I pointed to a peak, and he told him, and it fired accurately at that. So they were using Bofors guns like sharp shooters.
But they were creative.
And very creative.
Because even Bofors manufacturers did not know that they were going to use, India was going to use it.
And it was
so
brilliant because the Pakistan, we couldn't really dislodge them from the peaks, right? They had Tiger Hill, they had Tololing, and they were sitting on top looking down at us like this. So by shooting them, the Pakistanis never expected, because they were banging those, the enforcements that were there up on the ridge with the Pakistanis were occupying. And the accuracy with which the Bofors gun fired, apart from the fact they were also lobbing shells across the border to, target their supply lines and the other things that they had built up. So here was a gun that had caused so much, or artillery gun that had caused so much controversy, but really outperformed itself.
I'll talk now about your experience reporting the Kargil War, because it was very difficult for any Indian journalist who was there at the time. very difficult to get your dispatches through, for it to reach New Delhi, for it then to be either published or aired for TV journalists or for print media. We'll talk about the difficulties of reporting a war. It's very different. I've covered war, but I've covered war in modern times of technology where we were almost live, not exactly live, because in a war situation going live is very difficult, but almost real time in covering a war. For the lot of you who covered 1999, it was a different story altogether. We'll talk about that, but let's just listen to Prime Minister Modi on the tunnel that has now been inaugurated by him, and what it really means for India in terms of strengthening communication and connectivity with Leh and Dras, and ensuring that there is no misadventure by Pakistan in those parts of Jammu and Kashmir.
अब कुछ ही क्षणों में आप श्रृंखला सुरंग का पहला विस्फोट देखेंगे, जिससे सुरंग के निर्माण कार्य की शुरुआत होगी।
So that was Prime Minister Modi speaking on inaugurating the tunnel. Raj, a very important one when it comes to communication and connectivity. In your reporting, the fact that everybody did focus on how connectivity was indeed a problem. Do you see a marked difference now and a focus of this administration in getting that area, that problem area resolved and solved?
I think that was one of the big lessons we had to learn, because at that time we only had road connectivity. And I do remember driving down to the battlefield over there. Of course, I must say that it was really my colleagues who did an outstanding job. I was what in military parlance would have been called the DGMO, because I was directing the show from Delhi and making sure everybody was there on the spots that we needed. But I did go down finally because I said there's no way that I'm going to be sitting out here in Delhi and doing it. So you could see the importance of that particular link that was there, and the fact that they could cut us off. The main idea was, I think it was National Highway 1, or still is, it was the connecting link between Srinagar and Leh, where if they cut that off, they actually cut off Leh in many senses and cut off our access to many of the points that were there, and really occupy the heights and threaten us. So I think we learned the lessons in terms of building infrastructure over there. The tunnel is a very good example of how we can bring connectivity to an area that is really cut off 6 months in a year. And the kind of snow that falls there, and it's really very tight conditions. I've also been to Siachen, which of course is 10 times more difficult to terrain than this. But clearly what we are doing on the border is very important. I think we've improved the grid considerably. One of the big things we learned was the intelligence failure of Kargil. The fact that we didn't know these troops had come till they actually come. We saw the same problem. If you know what happened in China across the LAC.
Yes.
So have we learned our lessons? It's something we need to look at. Are our troops equipped, despite the fact that we have a phenomenal amount of tech that has come in? Why are these Jammu attacks happening without us able to pin them down rapidly and knock these terrorists that are doing? That's something for us to think about. Where is it because we focused all our attention on the valley and left these areas, and now we are vulnerable and the international border is porous? So at every step, whatever we do, we have to be on guard.
The former top cop of Jammu and Kashmir, SP Vaid, actually in a conversation said the exact same thing, that our security architecture has not strengthened in Jammu. In fact, we focus so much on Kashmir and the valley is the reason why there are so many gaping holes when it comes to security
Right.
of Jammu, and which is what Pakistan is taking advantage of.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, from their side, they're looking at it tactically, but I think they're making a mistake. I think Pakistan, as I mentioned earlier, has to focus internally. They have serious economic issues. They have a border on the other side with Afghanistan that is in trouble. It is very surprising for me because they pushed as much as we did for the 2021 ceasefire agreement, and the borders had been, the LOC had been quiet. So for them to be doing this, of course, there seems to be an element of desperation, because the fact is that there was a very successful conducting of the elections in Jammu and Kashmir, and no one can complain because you did have someone who was in jail, Engineer Rashid, actually being elected as Member of Parliament. If one had to accuse the Election Commission, then that reality wouldn't have happened.
Yes.
So the fact is that the turnout was enormous. It was 58% when you normally got only 40 or below. And I think that was a cause of concern because normalcy was beginning to return. There's of course a lot to be done in the valley, as you know and I know. There is a whole lot of development objectives that have to be achieved. There are a whole lot of youngsters that need to get their jobs and be gainfully employed, and they must feel the benefits of peace. If we don't do that, we will not learn our lessons.
And positively engage the youth and the people of Kashmir.
Absolutely. If we don't do that, we will not learn our lessons. We will again have the situations that we have saw being repeated ad nauseum.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it's a very, very sad chapter whenever we think of Jammu and Kashmir. It's not happy things. We're always marking wars, 71, 88, 89, Kashmiri Pandits fleeing, 1999. Every decade we have something. The terror attacks, 2008. The standoff that we've had. Then we come to 2016.
Pulwama, Uri.
I mean, hello. Yes. Why are we doing this? Why is Pakistan doing this? They need to grow, and I've always believed that if we put our strengths together, we will be a tremendous subcontinent. There's so much we can do together. And this territorial issue can be sorted differently. There doesn't need to be this continuous confrontation.
There's so much cowardice, when it comes to Pakistan's strategy. Look, they do not want to confront India directly, and that's why they use terrorists and mujahideen. They have continued to do that, whether if it's 1999, where under the garb of mujahideens, you had the Pakistani soldiers, or even today. There's an expert, Raj, who said that the tactics that they're using now, the modus operandi has changed. They're not Fidaeens who are coming and blowing themselves up. They are well-trained people, so certainly either ex-army men or trained by the Pakistani army, who come, draw out our soldiers, kill them, and go back. So it's not Fidaean attacks anymore in Jammu, and which certainly goes to show that Pakistan is not focusing on things that they should focus on. And for India, this is always going to remain a troubled area. It's not going to change.
I agree. I think they need to cut their doublespeak.
Yes.
Right? On one side, you have Nawaz Sharif and Mariam and Shahbaz Sharif saying they want peace with India. On the other side, you have these attacks that are there. Then they say that, look, we made the overtures and you're not responding, India's not responding. And yet, is that the way you should respond back? Because you have to build trust. And the fact is that we cannot continue to do this, wage this kind of guerrilla or terror war that goes on right across the LOC firstly, and now within our own territory. And the sooner Pakistan realizes, and the sooner the world realizes as well, that this is not a war that is going to have any great outcomes. We have, Article 370 and the abrogation of it, and all these years very clearly indicated India's control over it. The fact is that by that singular move that Prime Minister Modi did in 2019, is that was to be a closed chapter. It is an onus on us to give back to the Jammu and Kashmir people their statehood, the development that we called for. But it is also the onus of us to ensure that Pakistan doesn't do the kind of nonsense that it is doing currently.
Finally, before I let you go, Raj, the international community, we've seen a lot of reactions, and we've seen it in the past. We continue to see it even now when attacks continue from across the border. But how big a factor was China back then? How big is it now, today?
Well, at that time, I think it was a factor, certainly. After all, they are supposed to be all-weather friends and come what may. I think what are the newer terms we're learning from Putin and Xi meeting? It's unlimited friendship. I don't know what is the latest. Limitless, I think is the word. Right. So they did have all that at that time, but I think at that time, the threat from China had, in some senses, they were not opening that front too much. Right. If you recall, we had signed the treaties that were there, the agreements that were there to keep peace and tranquility out there. There were a lot of chess pieces on the board for us to ensure that what we followed the Deng Xiaoping philosophy, which was, the border is an issue. We can keep that aside and we can do trade. So trade was flourishing, and China wanted to get into the WTO and the entire world globalization move. So it strategically and tactically maintained its neutrality in some sense. It was still supplying a lot of stuff. Let's not forget, on the strategic stuff, China had fed them with missiles and also helped them with their nuclear program, as we have seen subsequently what are the kind of things that happened in terms of that. So, but when you look at the situation now, that's vastly altered. There is a very dangerous nexus that is building, and a triangle nexus if you do not woo Russia enough and keep our relations. So you have that arc that is building, a very strong arc, and China is a more aggressive China that we've seen. We've seen what they've done on our LAC. We are seeing what they're doing in the Taiwan Straits. We're seeing their approach and attitude to it. So we have to be very careful, because even here, we don't know what the truth is, but the fact is that Chinese equipment has reached them, the communication equipment. There's a lot of support that is going on out there. Doesn't help China, in my opinion, because they have so much at stake with their, their entire, all their construction projects that they put in and everything else. So, but we need to be careful. There is no doubt that we are under pressure from the Chinese front on the LAC, and now, of course, this I think will soon go live, get hot once the snow. Once the Indian Army starts coming right back to retaliate as to what the Pakistanis have done up there.
Raj Hengappa, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. That was a really in-depth, incisive conversation on Pakistan's role, Pakistan Army's role in the Kargil War, but what happens, not just what happened back then, but also what continues to happen right now, and how Pakistan should introspect and think what they need to do to set their own house in order. Having said that, we'll continue our coverage on Kargil Vijay Diwas. It is not just a reminder of the valor of our brave hearts, but also a call to never ever forget.
Yeah, I think it's a day that we must all pay tribute. Very